So I am here on behalf of one of the sponsors, the WBFI, which is the Wild Bird Feeding Institute. I do not work directly for them. I'm a contractor that basically I consult with them, offer them tips and advice uh, because it is a trade association for companies that produce bird feeders, bird seed, and adjacent products, right? So when I found them years ago, um, they had they didn't have a lot of industry. They had industry expertise, obviously, on the production side, but on the biological side, there was a lot of open area still. And so I joined as an organization, as an affiliate organization in their membership, and then started working with them to kind of help bring up some aspects of the industry and provide a little bit more information. So again, don't work directly for them, but I am their partner naturalist. So some of the things I'm going to tell you today, just note that is not me saying these things. This is coming directly from businesses who are part of this association, this industry. And so I'm going to be sharing some direct quotes from them. I'm going to share some statistics from them on some specifically hummingbird feeder sales over the past few years. I cannot share all the data because they pay a lot of money for these studies to be done. These are big market studies. And so I have had to redact some things because their members pay big bucks for this. Okay. So you'll see some of it, but not all of it. But I tried to include as much that's related to hummingbirds as possible. Quick about me. So my day job is actually with the National Audubon Society, and then this is what I do on the side. So it's all birds all the time for me. And so when I am consulting with businesses in and out of the industry, I'm consulting as my separate organization, which is Flocking Around. So the big takeaways from today, the big things that I want for you all to get from this, I'm going to show you some of the trends in sales, what influences design in feeders, because I know we all have thoughts on feeder design. I have plenty of my own. And so I'm going to tell you from their side why they make things the way they make them. And how research does help guide some of the decisions they make. And then what they advocate for in their guidance for consumers. So, changing nectar, things like that. And then I'll take your questions. If you want them to go to the industry and you have a question like, hey, I want to know why are they doing this? I'll take that to them. I can't necessarily answer for them, but I'll take it to them. And then questions from them for you all. Okay. All right. So trends in sales. So research from 2021 showed that 11% of the people who were bird feeding in 2021 started during the pandemic. The majority of those were women and young people. So a huge surge, an 11% surge in feeder sales and food sales in 2021 that started during 2020 once shutdowns began occurring. And again, majority were women and young people. It still skews heavily male, and still age demographics are higher, but there was a big push during that time. Okay, so someone asked me this morning, I think it was Patty who asked me, I don't know where you're at in the room, but about nectar sales versus, well, aren't most people making their own nectar? And so, yes, as you're about to see, so this is nectar sales. So this is food sales, right? Food purchases. Obviously, most people aren't making their own seed, but most people maybe are making their own nectar. And so you can see US and Canada, 8% in the US, 5% in Canada are making nectar purchases. However, when you compare that to how many actually own, and so the way that the question was asked, they both got hummingbird feeders and nectar feeders as answers. A lot of consumers own hummingbird feeders or nectar feeders, but it's a much higher percentage than are buying nectar, which I think is a result of the advocacy from folks like you in this room about buying nectar is generally bad. Okay. However, nectar production is changing, and I have some interesting tidbits to share from there. But I think those two slides show nectar purchase pretty low, but the amount that are feeding with hummingbird feeders and nectar, it's actually, I mean, you can see right here, it's the second highest type of feeder offer or that's being purchased regularly in the market, according to respondents to this survey. Okay. So from if you look at from a profile standpoint of avid bird watchers, the number one feeder type for an avid bird watcher is the hummingbird feeder. And you can see, interestingly, from someone who describes himself as an avid bird feeder, from an avid bird feeder, they're buying more nectar than we saw the average was, which is interesting because you'd think they would be getting exposed the most to don't buy it, make it, right? But you can see very high on the list for the profile of the avid bird feeders. For the frequent bird feeders, hummingbird feeders, still number one. So hummingbird feeders are probably the most popular feeder type put out by those who responded to the survey as someone who feeds birds. Okay, and again, you can see then those who purchase nectar, it's going down here, okay? And then you'll see in the next group, it goes down again. So the avid profile, they are the ones who are purchasing the most nectar, which is just interesting. And so then the occasional bird feeder, they'll do it, but they're not always pursuing it. Still, though, the hummingbird feeders are at the top. And then nectar, you can see, went down just 1 percentage point, at least for those in the US. Okay, so part of the survey was there was a mental health component to the survey because there's a bunch of research being done right now, obviously, with being outside, doing things in nature and how they help our mental health. And so two of the top reasons for why people say they feed wild birds, you can see them there on your screen. Hopefully you can read that. But the first one is, I wanted to develop a connection with nature. 34% in the US agreed with that, 39% in Canada. And then I grew up in a family that fed birds, 36% in the US, 30% in Canada. So two of the strongest, one was connection, and the second was family. Okay. And then as far as a hobby goes, what is considered an enjoyable hobby to people, and why is it enjoyable? Okay, and then characteristics of the hobby of feeding wild birds and watching them. And so number one is reduce stress. So hobbies, most people like hobbies because they reduce stress. They have a positive impact on mental health and harmony and beauty in your life. And so those were the three top ones that bird feeding shared with what many folks describe as an enjoyable hobby. Okay, time of year. So this is an interesting one. I would bet that this is different based on the profile, and we didn't break it out based on profile, or at least I don't have that to show you. So when are most people feeding? So as it pertains to hummingbird feeding, at least, you can see that summer is second most after spring. Third is actually fall. Winter is lowest. So many people, we think, I often hear about people who stop feeding in the summertime, but it is in fact the reverse, at least according to this study. This was about 2,000 people that responded to this study, 1,000 from each country, and winter is the lowest. And from a seed standpoint, maybe that doesn't make sense. However, we saw what was the number one feeder type? It was hummingbird feeders. So the 3 seasons we have hummingbirds in most of the continent, spring, summer, and fall, well, that's when those feeders are going up. And so then feeding is actually decreasing as we go into wintertime. Okay, so let's talk design. So these are coming directly from 2 of the larger feeder companies that make these feeders. And so I've got the industry as a whole did not all provide responses. I'm just using what was sent to me. So what goes into how and why they design things the way they do. So from the first company here, The top points that they wanted listed: ease of cleaning. Hummingbird feeders need to be easy to clean. That's a huge factor driving hummingbird sales. They need to not leak. Leaks cause messes. They need to have enough capacity that they don't have to be changed every couple of hours. Pest management, ease of filling, and then visual appeal at storefront came in last. But they had a note that one of the biggest drivers of long-term customer satisfaction is a feeder that is easy to disassemble and thoroughly clean. Because no one wants to clean in the first place. Let's be honest, that's probably the hardest thing to get people who feed hummingbirds to do, is take proper care of their nectar and clean their hummingbird feeders regularly. So a feeder that is easiest to clean is biggest priority. So according to them, that is one of the biggest drivers of long-term customer satisfaction, not necessarily sales, but satisfaction. Okay. So this is from the next company. This is the main points that they wanted shared about here, and they have a lot of points. So they generally shoot for feeders in the 8 to 24 ounce capacity, 4 to 8 ports. Something that has to have a secure hanger, generally metal, is their preferred. They sell a lot. This company that sent this, they probably distribute and sell the most, and so for them, they're doing a lot of different varieties of feeders that they're sharing out there. They want a transparent bottle so people can see nectar levels. Okay, they want red incorporated somewhere in it. A 2-part base with a tight seal. That's for ease of cleaning. Ant moats are not required, but preferred if they're built into the feeder. Deep ports so that honeybees can't access the nectar as easily. Perches, they're not necessary for them to put it out on the market. They prefer bottle feeders with flat bottle bottoms or tops, depending upon which you're looking at it, because then you can flip it over, set it upright to fill it. So bottles that don't have that flat ability to feed. Most of you probably are familiar with the feeders that have that flat bottle top. They're very common. Many of you probably use them. They're one of the companies that distributes those. Wide bottle mouth for many of their feeders. Again, ease of cleaning and then also ease of filling. You don't have to buy a funnel just to fill it. And then a baffle on the base to prevent pests. And then one of the things they wanted pointed out here is the most important consideration when purchasing a hummingbird feeder is how easy it is to clean. Can it be unassembled, cleaned, and reassembled easily? And then next would be how easy it is to fill it. So 2 different companies, they had no idea what the other was saying. And you see very similar lines on how they go about this process of what is important in a hummingbird feeder. Okay. All right. So the next question we asked them, do you reference research? And so these are a couple of quotes that they provided. So the first company, we do not have proprietary research studies on hummingbird attraction. However, our understanding is that feeder placement, nectar quality, cleanliness, and availability of food tend to have a greater impact on usage than feeder design alone. Seems like a somewhat reasonable statement, okay? And then the other organization, they use information that comes from hummingbirdssociety.org. They basically just sent me their link and said, we get it all from there. So that was their contribution, okay? And then they added, good feeder designs balance attractiveness to hummingbirds and humans while minimizing insect pressure and spoilage. So big one there. Okay, like I said, the Hummingbird Society. A lot of these companies do reference the hummingbirdssociety.org website for their information, which I thought was interesting. Some other studies. So this is a study that I'm going to just quickly touch on, and we're not going to go too in depth. This was a feeder study on polarized light, specifically on seed birds, but I think they're potential interesting component as far as it relates to hummingbirds. And so what they found is that feeders that were shinier and reflected more polarized light attracted a greater abundance and diversity than feeders that were not shiny. So you can see the shiny, the matte, and the tube, and the relative species richness in graph B there. Okay, and go into a little bit more. So that was abundance, or this is abundance. That was diversity, and you can see little bit how interesting this is. They went into another study, and I'm not going to go into it just because I only have a few minutes here. But they actually then got polarized lights and put them on feeders. And what they found is when they put polarized lights shining directly onto feeders, the amount of birds visiting increased even more. So there's some interesting things that are coming out of that. You may start to see some feeders with some very different designs because of this study. This study came from the Research Foundation at the Wild Bird Feeding Institute. So if you ever have feeding adjacent studies with hummingbirds, I would recommend you look into the Wild Bird Feeding Institute's Research Foundation because they supply grants to nonprofits, generally with a feeding component. Okay. So this is the summary of their big findings here that they shared with us. This is an ongoing study. This was just after, I think, the first 2 years of the pilot. Okay. Okay, so then what do they do when it comes to educational resources on Nectar and taking care of your feeder? So this is directly from the companies, what each of them says they share in their literature when they're selling feeders or, in their informational components of their websites, stores, what have you, okay? And so the one company said that if they're selling a Nectar in store, it's using sucrose. They try to avoid add-ons. It seems like there's a shift in the industry moving finally away from commercial red dye. You'll see some of them still that are red, and that's because there's this new thing. And again, I don't know as much about this, but where they're adding this carmine coloration, which is basically it's from crushed up insect bodies. So they crush up the insects, and that creates this red dye that they're putting in some of these nectar solutions. And then what they're telling people, if they're making it at home, boiling not necessary. They advocate for frequent cleaning and then avoid filling to capacity because oftentimes the nectar will spoil before it's all eaten. Another company then, this is the 5 big points that they focus on when they're selling to folks. Refreshing, nectar often, regular cleaning, follow manufacturer instructions if you're using a store-bought nectar or something, no food coloring, and no add-ons like preservatives. Okay. This quote from this company was, one point we consistently emphasize to consumers is that feeder cleanliness and nectar freshness are often more important than feeder style when it comes to successful hummingbird feeding. This quote sounds very similar to the one early, and that's from 7 completely different companies. So you can see there's some consistency across at least a few of the producers within the industry. Okay,